Marriage among medieval kings was far more complicated than the fairy tales would have you believe. Some rulers followed long-standing traditions, while others invented their own rules as they went along. Let us explore the truth behind royal wedding customs throughout the ages. Across medieval Europe, marriage customs differed greatly depending on region, religion, and the mood of the ruler. For most Christian kings in Western Europe, the standard rule was to have only one wife at a time. The Catholic Church strongly disapproved of divorce, meaning that a king was expected to stay with his queen until one of them died. It was much like modern marriage, except with more executions and fewer counseling sessions. In real life, however, many rulers discovered creative methods to replace their wives when the need arose. Some kings were truly devoted to one woman for their entire lives. Yet others treated marriage as a form of collecting rare items. The most infamous case was England's Henry VIII, known for having 6 wives. His string of marriages became so famous that it inspired the rhyme, divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded, survived. That certainly puts "it's complicated" in a new light. Henry's situation was unique in Western Europe, as he even broke away from the Catholic Church to make some of those marriages possible. Meanwhile, in Eastern Europe and across the Islamic world, the traditions were entirely different. Ottoman sultans maintained large harems, filled with wives and concubines, sometimes numbering in the dozens. Sultan Ibrahim I, also called Ibrahim the Mad, was said to have more than 200 women in his harem. That was not just a marriage. It was an entire community with complex family gatherings. Mongol rulers lived in a similar way. Genghis Khan had so many wives and concubines that scientists believe as many as 16 million men alive today could be his descendants. That would make for an extremely crowded family reunion. Exact numbers are hard to confirm, since many rulers had unofficial wives joined through private ceremonies not approved by the church or the state. Some Norse rulers took part in hand-fasting ceremonies that were not recognized under Christian law, but were legitimate within their own culture. On average, officially acknowledged marriages among Western European kings ranged from 1 to 3 across a lifetime. Most had just 1 or 2, with outliers such as Henry VIII making the statistics look extreme. In cultures where polygamy was accepted, the numbers could easily reach the tens, or even higher. Another reason for multiple royal marriages was the short lifespan of the time. Many queens died in childbirth, forcing kings to marry again in hopes of producing more heirs. Ferdinand II of Aragon married twice, taking Isabella of Castile as his second wife after his first died young. With different traditions across lands and centuries, the royal marriage count could become very confusing. Their wedding planners surely had their work cut out for them. The royal marriage story gets even more interesting when we look at romance, or rather, the lack of it. In medieval times, love rarely played a part in royal unions. Kings did not flirt over candlelit dinners or choose queens based on affection. Instead, marriage was a political contract that could change the fate of entire kingdoms. Politics determined most royal matches. A strategic bride could bring peace between longtime enemies, secure an alliance, or expand a ruler's territory. 2 kingdoms might spend years at war, only to suddenly unite when their monarchs became relatives. Nothing repaired the damage of an invasion, quite like becoming family. Money also played a crucial role in these arrangements. A valuable bride came with a dowry from her family, which might include gold, jewels, estates, or even trading privileges. One French princess brought so much treasure that 30 wagons were needed to move it all. Royal accountants were deeply involved in planning these unions, ensuring every coin was accounted for in the contract. The royal marriage market was fiercely competitive. Noble families across Europe prepared their daughters for potential royal matches, employing skilled tutors to teach languages, music, and etiquette. From a young age, these girls learned the refined arts of conversation, dance, and household management to be ready for life at court. Every skill a royal bride possessed had one purpose: to impress her potential in-laws during the careful selection process. Family background was absolutely vital. A queen had to come from noble blood, ideally from a long line of royalty or aristocracy with no questionable ancestry. Royal matchmakers investigated family trees that stretched back many generations to prevent unions between close relatives, though this rule was frequently ignored. Health and appearance carried more weight than romantic tales would suggest. Before any royal marriage could be confirmed, brides went through detailed physical examinations. Court physicians checked for signs of poor health or physical conditions that might make childbirth risky. In certain courts, even the bride's female relatives were examined to assess the family's fertility record. Physical beauty and strength were part of the checklist too. Inspectors looked for broad hips, smooth skin, and clean teeth as signs of health and childbearing potential. Compared to these rigorous standards, modern dating looks downright affectionate. Childbearing hips were not just admired, they were a job requirement. Age also played a major role. Royal brides were often far younger than their husbands. Girls as young as 12 could be considered ready for marriage, though many weddings took place when the bride was around 14 or 15. Kings, on the other hand, were often in their 30s, 40s, or even older when marrying these young women. The age difference did not cause scandal in those times. It was seen as practical, giving the couple more years to produce multiple heirs. Religion was another deciding factor. Catholic kings were expected to marry Catholic queens, and Protestant rulers required Protestant brides. Changing faith for marriage was rare but not unheard of. Because religion limited the pool of suitable candidates, royal matchmakers often had to travel far across Europe to find eligible partners. The pressure to make the right match was immense. A single poor choice could lead to rebellion, loss of wealth, or even open war. Medieval royal advisors did not worry about emotional compatibility, but about preventing diplomatic disasters. Once the marriage took place, all focus shifted to the royal nursery. Having children was not just a private wish, but a political obligation. Producing multiple heirs was vital to keeping the royal bloodline alive and maintaining peace across the kingdom. The more children a king had, the safer his dynasty appeared. Royal families tended to be much larger than common ones. While an ordinary peasant couple might have 5 or 6 children, some kings fathered 10 or more. One English monarch had 15 legitimate children, plus at least 6 more born outside his marriage. The number of birthday celebrations must have been overwhelming. Sons were the most treasured, as they could inherit the throne. But life in the medieval world was perilous for all children. Nearly 1/3 of them died before the age of 5. Even royal infants, protected by wealth and attendants, often fell victim to disease. The pressure on queens to give birth to healthy sons was enormous. Those who failed to do so were often replaced or set aside. When a king asked how many children were enough, his advisors would respond, as many as possible. Yet an excess of sons brought its own troubles. Rivalries often turned violent once the king died. Brothers clashed for control of the crown, sometimes resorting to murder to remove competition. Family gatherings could quickly turn into battlegrounds when every prince arrived armed and suspicious. Daughters, however, served a very different purpose. They were valuable tools in forming political alliances. A princess could seal peace treaties or strengthen relations between kingdoms through marriage. Many were promised to foreign princes or nobles before they reached their teenage years. By 12 or 13, most royal daughters were already considered bargaining pieces in diplomatic negotiations. Royal children rarely saw much of their parents. After birth, they were placed in the care of nurses, tutors, and servants. Their royal mother and father might visit only once or twice a week for short, formal meetings, leaving the upbringing of future kings and queens to others. Children born outside of marriage were a regular part of royal life in the Middle Ages. Though these illegitimate sons and daughters could not legally inherit the throne, they were often publicly acknowledged by their royal fathers. Many were granted noble titles, estates, and even high-ranking court positions. One Moroccan sultan is said to hold the record, fathering an astonishing 867 children with his wives and concubines. It is safe to say he never remembered all their names, let alone their birthdays. With offspring scattered across castles, estates, and foreign courts, royal family trees began to look like chaotic webs. Each of these children needed somewhere to live, and housing them was no small task. So where did all these royal wives and families actually stay? The living arrangements for queens were as complicated as the royal marriages themselves. Organizing royal residences was like playing an elaborate game of musical chairs, except those who lost were sent to convents instead of simply stepping aside. A chief queen usually received the most magnificent accommodations available. She often lived in the royal palace, located in the capital city, in an area specifically built for her known as the Queen's Apartments. These spaces were decorated with rich tapestries, elegant furniture, and intricate artwork that displayed her prestige. Some queens even had private throne rooms where they met with visitors and oversaw their own affairs. In royal housing, proximity meant power. The nearer your chambers were to the king's rooms, the greater your influence at court. Medieval. Real estate was not about scenic views, but about how quickly you could reach the king without crossing several courtyards. No queen ever wished her bedroom were farther from the royal chambers. Queens managed surprisingly large households. A typical royal woman might command dozens of attendants, including ladies-in-waiting, servants, guards, and officials. One English queen reportedly maintained a personal staff of over 200 people. Her private quarters must have been busier than a city marketplace. These attendants were not just there for comfort. They were a public display of the queen's authority and status. The size and splendor of her living quarters reflected her rank. A principal queen could have entire palace wings devoted to her, containing bedchambers, prayer rooms, dining halls, and private libraries. Queens who could read were considered refined and cultured, and many were actually better educated than the kings they married. In polygamous royal courts, such as those of the Ottoman Empire or certain Asian and African kingdoms, the housing situation grew even more intricate. Each wife typically had her own residence, complete with private baths, kitchens, and gardens. Architects designed these complexes with careful attention, ensuring that different wives could go about their lives without awkward encounters in shared corridors. In Islamic courts, this arrangement evolved into the idea of the harem, a secluded and guarded part of the palace reserved for wives, concubines, and female relatives. Despite the myths spread over time, harems were not just pleasure houses. They functioned as self-contained communities where women played major roles in managing the daily affairs of the royal household. The famous harem at Topkapi Palace in Constantinople contained hundreds of rooms and at its height housed more than 1,000 women. For secondary wives or those who lost the king's favor, life was less glamorous. They were often relocated to smaller palaces away from the main capital or sent to distant estates far from political power. Being moved to the countryside was the medieval equivalent of being politely dismissed from royal attention. While these secondary residences were still luxurious compared to common homes, they represented a sharp decline in influence and privilege. Convents, meanwhile, served as convenient destinations for unwanted or discarded queens. When a king wished to remove a wife without the drama of an execution, sending her to a convent offered an acceptable solution. Few gestures could end a royal marriage more clearly than ordering one's former queen to take holy vows and spend the rest of her days in silence and prayer. Royal women who were sent to convents did not always live in poverty or hardship. These so-called royal nuns often maintained a lifestyle far more comfortable than that of ordinary sisters. They brought their own attendants, personal luxuries, and sometimes even continued to receive royal allowances. A few shrewd kings went so far as to build entirely separate palaces for their different wives, hoping to prevent jealousy and daily arguments. When royal spouses crossed paths too often, palace life could turn deadly, with suspicious illnesses, poisonings, and mysterious accidents becoming alarmingly frequent. Separate residences helped keep the peace, both within the palace and throughout the kingdom. Exiled queens, however, endured the harshest fates. A woman who had truly fallen out of favor might be sent away to a lonely fortress or confined on a remote island. Some spent decades in these gilded cages, living in comfort but cut off from the world. The royal palace itself was more than a home. It functioned as a stage where architecture symbolized politics. Every corridor, chamber, and suite represented a rank, a privilege, or a subtle statement about power. Yet even more political than where people slept was the question of who was allowed to share the king's bed. Officially, only the queen had that right, but the truth was much more tangled. Royal intimacy was tied not only to desire, but to diplomacy and influence. The king's private life shaped the destiny of entire nations. Royal mistresses became powerful figures in court life, often shaping politics as much as ministers did. Though the church loudly condemned adultery, everyone quietly accepted that kings would ignore that commandment. Monarchs were notorious for doing as they pleased, earning them a reputation as the original rule breakers. Some courts even created formal roles for royal mistresses, granting them titles, estates, and authority. These women came from diverse backgrounds. Many were high-born ladies who had caught the monarch's eye during royal celebrations or hunting trips. Others were ladies-in-waiting, noble women assigned to serve the queen, which made for some painfully awkward household dynamics. Imagine serving tea to your mistress while secretly being the king's lover. Medieval court life was filled with that kind of scandal. Certain noble families actually encouraged their daughters to catch the monarch's attention, seeing an affair as a fast route to political power. If a daughter became the king's favorite, her family could gain lands, wealth, and positions at court. One French noble clan rose from obscurity to immense fortune after their daughter began a royal affair. The number of mistresses varied from one monarch to another. Some kings were known for fidelity, while others collected lovers with enthusiasm. One French ruler was rumored to have more than 70 mistresses, though historians treat that figure with skepticism. Even so, the gossip surrounding royal romance could fill entire chronicles. Advisors sometimes tried to set limits on royal relationships. Affairs with noble women were often tolerated, but relationships with commoners or foreign women caused concern. The latter were seen as potential spies or political liabilities. Spymasters likely kept detailed notes about who visited the royal chambers, wondering whether the lady in question was gathering secrets or simply smitten. Entering the king's bedchamber was no easy task. Royal sleeping quarters were protected by multiple guards and locked doors. Only a handful of trusted servants and family members were permitted entry. Controlling who had access to the royal bed became a political weapon of its own. Some mistresses bribed guards or attendants to help them slip into the royal apartments unseen. In the Ottoman Empire and other Islamic courts, this entire process was formalized through the harem system. Each night, the ruler would summon one wife or concubine, a choice that often reflected current alliances and political priorities. If a foreign ambassador required special favor, the ruler might spend the evening with a consort from that ambassador's homeland as a gesture of goodwill. Meanwhile, church leaders in Europe continued to lecture kings about remaining faithful, especially during sacred seasons like Lent or Advent. Most monarchs listened politely, nodded in agreement, and then ignored the advice entirely. Many queens, understanding the political nature of royal marriage, accepted their husbands' infidelities as inevitable. Some even chose suitable mistresses themselves to maintain control over the situation. Better to select a harmless rival than risk being surprised by one. These tangled relationships between kings, queens, and lovers shaped the very fabric of medieval politics. Rivalries turned into feuds, love affairs became state secrets, and gossip flowed through palace corridors like fine wine. Poets wrote verses with hidden meanings, and painters disguised royal mistresses as goddesses or muses. In the end, these private romances often had public consequences. Empires rose, alliances shifted, and wars began, all because of who happened to share the royal bed. One French royal mistress in the Middle Ages was rumored to hold more sway over government decisions than the entire royal council. Surprisingly, many queens accepted their husbands' affairs as an unavoidable part of royal life. They knew their marriages were built on politics, not love, and that affection often belonged elsewhere. Some queens even handpicked their husbands' lovers, choosing women who posed no threat to their own status. In royal courts, not every wife was equal. A detailed ranking system existed among royal women, and understanding it helps explain why some queens ruled entire kingdoms through influence, while others disappeared from history. The queen was, by title, the highest-ranking wife, but her true authority depended on how much the king valued her. A crowned and consecrated queen held official recognition from both church and crown. Her image appeared on coins. She stood beside the king during ceremonies, and her name was spoken with reverence. Yet titles alone did not bring real control. True power came from affection and trust. A queen who gave birth to a male heir immediately gained strength and stability. Bearing a son was far more than fulfilling a duty. It transformed her status within the palace. When news spread that she had delivered a boy, her influence rose instantly, with better chambers, more servants, and courtiers eager to please her. Queens who produced several sons created multiple centers of loyalty, which protected them even if the king's affection shifted elsewhere. In cultures where multiple wives were permitted, order among them followed strict rules. The first wife usually held seniority, while others were ranked according to family background, favor, or the children they produced. Ottoman rulers kept this system formal within their harems, where the mother of the eldest son often gained enormous authority as the valid sultan. This position carried such weight that ambitious mothers sometimes plotted to secure their son's rise to power, knowing it would elevate their own standing. Some royal households maintained written systems defining wives' ranks. The Chinese imperial court, for instance, classified its royal women into 9 levels, from the empress at the top to the 5th-ranked concubines at the bottom. Each level came with distinct privileges, clothing styles, living arrangements, and numbers of attendants. Advancing within this system meant better meals, finer silk robes, and a greater share of attention during royal gatherings. A powerful mistress could sometimes overshadow even the queen herself if she managed to capture the king's attention and trust. Though a mistress might not possess an official title, she could still command immense influence by swaying royal choices, securing high positions for her relatives, and gathering impressive fortunes. One renowned French royal mistress was said to have received more lavish presents in a single year than the reigning queen collected in her lifetime. When she journeyed anywhere, her procession of carriages rivaled that of lesser queens. Some queens, however, managed to retain power despite their husbands' wandering interests. Through careful diplomacy, strong family alliances, or unshakable determination, these women held their ground at the heart of royal affairs. One English queen from the Middle Ages continued to oversee the royal household and direct foreign negotiations, even while her husband openly entertained multiple mistresses. She understood that her role as the mother of the future king provided deeper and more lasting authority than any fleeting romantic favor. Rivalries between wives and mistresses often defined the political climate of the court, sparking alliances, betrayals, and even violent disputes over succession. The women of the court frequently took sides, pledging loyalty either to the queen or to the current favorite, effectively dividing the palace into rival camps. These female factions could influence nearly every royal decision, from key government appointments to new diplomatic policies and marriage alliances. Age also played a significant part in determining a woman's standing within the royal hierarchy. Older queens who survived the perilous years of childbirth often emerged as respected matriarchs, their wisdom and experience granting them a new kind of power. A queen mother or grandmother could command reverence even from reigning kings, guiding decisions from behind the scenes. When the queen grandmother voiced her opinion, courtiers suddenly discovered pressing matters in distant corridors. This intricate web of rivalry, loyalty, and authority among royal women demonstrates that medieval politics was far from being a man's domain. Behind every crown stood women whose intelligence, strategy, and ambition shaped the destiny of nations, leaving marks that history has too often overlooked.